Later we visit the Jabalia Rehabilitation Society in Jabalia refugee camp. This school also cares mainly for students who are hearing impaired. We meet with Ahmed Abdullah, the chairman and a former UNRWA school headmaster. Mr. Abdullah was a child in a village now in Israel, just southeast of Ashkelon. In 1948, his entire family was killed by Jewish militias. He somehow escaped to Gaza. He says that he still has love in his heart in spite of all this. So why do they hate us? He asks rhetorically. We don't hate the US. We just hate Israeli apartheid. You want peace and security? Then give me justice and a stable future as a fellow human being. End the Jewish apartheid state and begin the secular democratic state, he explains further. We head north and visit a poor family who is also devastated because their 3 children all suffer from a genetic disease that leaves them with severe cognitive disabilities. Then we head north to Nassa village. The children of Nassa village are the descendants of Bedouin, wanderers in Arabic. They peer into our van with a mixture of curiosity and fear. For the only white people they have seen before have been dressed in Israeli military fatigues and had come to kill them. Nassa village lies beneath a giant cesspool, one that was breached. In March 2007, al-Nassa village in northern Gaza was completely flooded with sewage when a 6.5 acre septic cesspool containing 20,000 cubic meters of sewage water collapsed, killing 5 people and rendering hundreds homeless. The children of Nassa village have the features of all the wanderers that have traveled the Negev desert and wider Middle East, African, Arab, and European, but they are no longer wanderers because they are trapped. They look distinctly different from other Palestinian brethren. When we get out of the van, the children run away. It is clear that they have been abused by white people. They call me and Lauren Yahud Jew. I have to explain to them that we are Masihian Christians. I'm not sure these children know the difference. Nassa village lies wedged beneath the cesspools to the south, and the Berlin Wall and ominous watchtowers separating it from Ashkelon, Israel to the north. There used to be Israeli settlements to the east, but now there are sand dunes again. While I'm being interviewed in Nassa village by Russian television, I get the call from Dr. El Seraj. I have bad news for you. You will not be able to use the tunnels because the Egyptians will now allow you to exit Rafah on the surface. Sorry to disappoint you, he jokes. This has been an ongoing amusing banter between us ever since I explained my crazy idea to use the tunnels and try to create an international media incident. I was serious about the idea. I don't think Dr. Iyad ever was. I tell my dear friend, Dr. Iyad, that it's okay. I'm sure I can manage it. Dr. Jamal Kawdari, the chairman of the Popular Committee Against the Siege, calls me a few minutes later and asks me how quickly I can return to Gaza City and be ready to leave through Rafah. I say an abrupt goodbye to Lauren Booth, who is still stuck here. I will be out of Gaza and in Egypt in just 2 hours. I hop a ride from the Russian news crew and leave all the sadness of Nassa village behind. I get back to Dr. Seraj's house for some lighting speed packing and some quick goodbyes to his family, Nisreen, and 2-year-old Ali, which are tearful and hard. We are not sure why I'm being released now, while my colleagues are being left behind. Dr. Seraj thinks it has to do with counter pressure from my American senators and congresswoman. Mr. Kawdari is outside to bid me goodbye as I jump into a van. Before I know it, I'm heading at normal speeds to Rafah for the last time. We drive right by the Palestinian gate without stopping. This is real express service. The no man's land is empty because the border is closed to Palestinians. I'm taken through the Egyptian gate while I'm talking on the phone to a Mr. Stanley Heller, who is an American reporter who calls me from Connecticut serendipitously. As I give him a live description of my departure from Gaza, I enter the Egyptian terminal for the last time. A few minutes later, I'm outside on the curb, having cleared the entire Rafah border in less than 20 minutes. To get through Rafah, you have to pull the right strings, politically speaking. I'm just not sure at this point which strings were pulled by my friends back home on my behalf. A few months later, I read an email response to former Senator Joma Burezk, which also may have made the difference. On Monday, September 8, 2008 at 4:30 a.m., AMR Ramadan wrote, "Dear Senator Burezk, since your call on Thursday and I have been working with Cairo to see how best to help with Dr. Dienst's situation. As you are aware, he hasn't entered Gaza through a port controlled by Egypt. Moreover, the Rafah crossing was opened only for Palestinians in an attempt to ease the economic situation in Gaza. However, due to the humanitarian purpose of his presence in Gaza, the Egyptian authorities were able to accommodate his case and allowed him to leave Gaza through the Rafah crossing late yesterday. He should be coordinating his return to the US with the American Embassy in Cairo now. I hope this brings good news to his family and all those concerned with his case. I wish to thank you for bringing his case to our attention. Sincerely, AMR Ramadan, Charged Affairs Embassy of Egypt to the US 3521 International Court, NW Washington, D.C. 20008. Lauren Booth's departure from Gaza. September 21, 2008. It was 6:30 in the morning and the center of Rafah, in Gaza, was heaving. Mohammed, my personal security guard and friend, blasted through the traffic of donkey carts and school children. His driving was even more crazed than usual. He was almost as tense as I was. It was the third time we had driven to the Egyptian border, each time hoping I would be allowed out of Gaza. Each of the two previous times, I had been turned back after all-day ordeals. My passage refused at the end of those 2 days by the Egyptian authorities. My original intention on coming to Gaza by sea had been to stay just under a week and then head home to France. I hadn't considered the vagaries of the Egyptian border authorities. Having a passport plus an oral agreement that you can pass through the crossing had counted for nothing twice before. This time I was really desperate to get across. I had been stuck in Gaza for more than 4 weeks. Students who I had been with had managed to escape from Gaza by paying the all-important bakshish bribe to someone on the Egyptian side. Today I had only $300 in various pockets. Would that be enough? It all started well enough. Within half an hour of entering the airport-style terminal building on the Palestinian side, I had an exit visa stamp on my passport. But then to my horror I was led by Gaza police officers to the same building I had spent 13 hours in previously. Not the room of doom, I said, trying to make light of the situation, even as my heart sank toward my dirt-covered sandals. It had been 7 weeks since I had seen my daughters Alexandra and Holly, or my husband Craig. Just under a month of that time I had been an increasingly stressed resident of the Gaza Strip, unable to leave as Israeli diplomats leaned on Egypt to punish those of us on the siege-breaking boats for visiting the region without their permission to do so. I missed my family so badly I didn't allow myself to think of them for more than a moment. It was an exquisite kind of torture not knowing when I might see them again. I had met several women who hadn't seen their children in the West Bank for more than a year, one poor lady who hadn't seen her parents for 15 years. In the room of doom I laid out several chair cushions on the floor and forced myself to sleep. I lay there for nearly 3 hours before raised Arabic voices turned my blood to ice. What do you mean they must all go back to Gaza now? I looked at my friends and colleagues, a highly respected sheikh and a young man with bullet injuries, both Palestinian and both needing medical treatment in Cairo. Suddenly I was surrounded by armed guards. You can go. Only you. Leave now. I turned to my friends to say, what? Sorry, it's like this. Why me? No, I can't leave them. This is how it is at Rafah, divide and conquer, with no time for warmth, handshakes, and kind words. Linger when your coordination comes through, and you can miss your chance to go home, see your children, and leave this concentration camp. I'm in the terminal building on the Egyptian side of the Rafah crossing. Mothers in burqas sit on broken suitcases held together with rope. A young girl of about 5 has arms covered in bandages. I stroke her hair as I'm hustled into another office. She doesn't react at all, just stares at her feet. The atmosphere of powerlessness and despair is dizzying. Today I'm a VIP, it seems. A large man in a sweaty shirt smiles and takes my passport. Okay, he asks, and I try to force a smile back at him. A grimace is all I can manage. Outside in the main building, names are shouted out by officials. Hassan. Ahmed. Dijani. Husbands and fathers who have accidentally pleased distant officials will leave. Many will not pass, and will never know why. I ask the fat man behind the desk looking through piles of green Palestinian passports if he speaks English. He does not. This system is a disgrace, I say to him, in a friendly tone. He looks at me curiously. You should be ashamed of your part in this. Are you proud to be destroying lives today? I wave my hands around randomly and chuckle just for good measure. The official shakes his head, he doesn't understand. I go to a window in the midst of the human misery and pay for my exit visa. An armed guard in the red beret of the army waves me toward a corridor that says arrivals. I step outside into the sunshine. It has taken me 3 attempts and 29 hours, including more than 7 hours on this third try to get through this border, but I'm now in Egypt. I'm free to resume my life. My first thought is, will I ever see Gaza again? Chapter 16. Farming and fishing under fire. Donna and Darlene Wallach. 1. Gaza. On Monday, the 15th of September 2008, international human rights volunteers with the International Solidarity Movement and Free Gaza Movement joined the Palestinian Union of Agricultural Work Committees, UAWC, in symbolically planting trees in the buffer zone in Fakhari, east of Khan Younis and north of Rafah.